Okay, so hey guys, and welcome back to another predictions video, and in today's video I'm going to be predicting the Davis versus Martin fight. And so if you're new around here and you haven't yet subscribed, please do so. Like the video if you do indeed like the video, and let's get straight into it. So going into this fight, Davis is 29-0 with 27 KOs and Martin is 18-0 with 12 KOs. This fight is for the WBA World Lightweight title. Davis's last fight was a win via KO in round 7 versus Garcia, and Martin's last fight was a win via unanimous decision versus Harutunian. They are both southpaws. Davis is 5'5.5" and Martin is 5'8". And to speak a bit more about what I've just been saying, like I mentioned, the WBA World title on the line. This is Davis's belt. This is what he's been defending for a long time now, and he's coming off this huge fight versus Garcia where, you know, obviously all the eyes were on him. This was one of the bigger events of last year, and wait, was it last year, earlier this year? I can't remember, but it was one of the biggest events we've had in boxing in a long time. It was a fight in which, it was last year, it was a fight in which it was a long time in the making, and it had that hype, it had that build up around it, and obviously it ended in dramatic fashion. It was yet again Davis getting another stoppage victory and looking so dominant, but that also has aged very well as well. Of course, Garcia going on to then beat up Haney. Obviously, everything's been going on with Garcia as of recent since that fight, but nonetheless, the win for him's definitely aged well. But when you look at what Davis has been going through since that last fight, I don't want to speak about that too much, but obviously it's not been ideal for him what's been going on, and I think that perhaps could play a bit of a factor, a bit of a role for this fight. I don't necessarily know where Davis's head at's coming into this fight, and if he is as perhaps tuned in, locked in, focused as what perhaps he has been for other fights and things like that. Obviously, it was a little while ago, like a few months ago, when this was happening, but nonetheless, I don't necessarily know where his head's at. And for a fight like this, where he's coming off such a huge fight versus Garcia, which was, you know, pay-per-view, all eyes on him and everything like that, to a fight like this, which is still a huge fight, but it's nowhere near the level in which the Garcia fight was, and Davis is the clear favourite. You would have to think that perhaps his head might not be quite as focused coming into this one. But for Martin, on the other hand, it's a deserved world title shot for him. I wouldn't want to disagree and say that he's not worthy of this shot. Obviously, he's been building himself up, and he's coming off a performance in his last fight which was a tough performance. It was a fight where he really had to show a lot and show some grit and some heart, and he did that, and every fight has to go through that at a world level before they get the opportunity to fight for a world title. So it was good that he's gone through that now, and Harutunian is somebody who has now gained more respect. Obviously, he's going to go fight Stevenson next now. Obviously, it's not really a great fight, but nonetheless, he's had that respect from the fight versus Martin. And Martin, he did look very good at times and was getting Harutunian backed up at times, and of course managed to make him take a knee as well. And so there was a few things definitely that he did well, and I think he's going to be coming into this, of course, more than wanting to prove his worth and prove that he can operate at a top level. And there's definitely ways in which he could perhaps win this one and shock the world if he does win this one. And then, you know, if he does, of course, win this one, it's one of these fights where there is so much pressure on Davis. Obviously, I believe Davis is more than used to handling the pressure, but there's so much pressure on him. If Martin manages to come away with a win, probably will end up being a rematch, but nonetheless, that shoots Martin's name, you know, into that star kind of level where Davis is at the moment. And, you know, of course, the size advantage is always going to be there for Martin. Davis is always used to being the smaller guy, so there's no realistically problem with the height disadvantage for Davis. And so, you know, nonetheless, I thought I'd mention it. But to speak about other fights on this card, I was going to do a bit of a separate prediction, but in the end, I just don't think I have time. So I thought I'd mention them all for this one. And so there's 3 fights I want to speak about, world title type fights, and it's another great PBC card. Seems like since they've been joining Amazon Prime, they've just leveled up 10 times, and so it's really nice to see, and they're putting on some great events. So to start off with, I'm going to speak about Adames versus Gorsha for the WBC World Middleweight title, in which I think Adames will win via unanimous decision. I believe he's going to be a lot better then Gorsha. This is probably a little bit of a mismatch. There's a few arguable mismatches on this card. That's a few problems in which people have had with this whole event. There's the mismatches on there, but I believe this could be that. Gorsha is somebody who, he has that power, he has the ability to hurt you, he's proved that against Zoo, but he also has the ability to trade with you and to land hard, and he proved that against Lubin, but in the end I think Adames is just going to be way too physically strong. He's going to be able to bully Gorsha around realistically. Gorsha's probably willingly just going to go onto the back foot, and then that's where Adames is going to thrive. And I do like Adames' aggressive style. I think he's, defending the belt for the first time. It's nice to see him actually defending it, but I feel like this perhaps fight could just be to, get him a fight, to get him a defence. It's not really a fight in which makes too much sense realistically, but I also think at the same time the middleweight division isn't really too stacked at the moment, so there's not too many options available to him. The fight like a Shiraz fight, he's been ordered to fight for that title, but it's not really a massive level fight realistically, in America especially. So I just don't know, with the middleweight division at the moment, unless you're Janibek, there's not really too many huge fights. So, you take what you can get, and this fight is going to be an entertaining one. I believe they're both going to let their hands go, and like I say, I don't think Adames is going to stop Gorsha, because Gorsha is a very tough guy and has been around with some very good fighters who are pressure fighters, who are going to hit hard and everything like that, and he's managed to not get stopped so far, so I don't think he will. Like I say, unanimous decision victory for Adames. Moving on to Russell vs Puello for the WBC Interim World Super Lightweight title, in which I think Russell will win via TKO in round 9. Obviously everything that's happened with Puello, he of course had that drug problem and everything, so I don't necessarily know what kind of version we're going to see from Puello. Obviously, I think he has fought once since then and did get a win, but nonetheless, I still don't necessarily think we're going to see quite the same version. But I also really like Russell as well. I think he's an underrated fighter at the moment, but I think this fight is going to give him that recognition. Obviously, he's getting all stoppages at the moment as well, and he's got that momentum with him, and he does fight aggressively, and is going to bring the fight to Puello, and Puello is probably going to want to stand and trade at points, but I do think Russell's compactness is a bit better. I think he's going to be able to ride shots better, take shots better, land more, be the more physical, and then be able to win from that, and like I say, get that later into round 9 stoppage. And yeah, like I say, that's a way to get him to be more in the limelight, and in that super lightweight division, if there's somebody who can come through, there's big fights available there to him. And you never know, somebody like a Rolly Romero, obviously he's coming off a loss, but that could be a big fight to make, Russell versus Romero, and I would be fully here for that, and PBC wise they could definitely do that, so we'll have to wait and see. But yeah, I think, like I say, he'll be able to get a stoppage of victory. Moving on to Benavidez versus Gvozdyk for the WBC Interim World Light Heavyweight title. It's really nice to see Benavidez fighting. He is one of my favourite fighters. Offensive wise, he's always going to bring the fight, and he's coming off a very impressive performance versus Andrade last time out, where he did have times where he was getting caught with, maybe not caught with shots, but Andrade was bringing pressure and throwing in good combinations as he does. But in the end, Benavidez was just too much, and has been too much for every single fighter he's been in against, and is physically just too strong, too powerful, and just imposing, and just for a big guy, the way that he can just throw just such impressive combinations. And in general, it's going to be interesting to see him move up into this division. Obviously, everything's been talked about him fighting Canelo, and obviously we aren't seeing that, and it is a little bit frustrating. But I respect him for wanting to go and chase other ventures and still become a world champion. And I believe, obviously this is interim, so we never know, and we're going to have to wait for Bivol versus Beterbiev before we can even see a chance for Benavidez to fight for their world title. But I think this fight's an interesting one. Gvozdyk, I don't really see anything too good from what I've seen, especially from his last fight. Like, he did get a stoppage win, but he looked slow, and they didn't really look like there was too much to him. He's going to have a bit of power, but I think that Benavidez is going to be able to ride that and take down. I think Benavidez's defence is improving with each fight. That's always something that has had criticisms. But yeah, like I said, I think Benavidez will win via KO in round 5, TKO, KO in round 5. I think he is going to be physically way too much for Gvozdyk. I think Gvozdyk is, he's older as well and slower, and I just don't necessarily see any way in which Gvozdyk can win. I just think Benavidez moving up in weight is going to be even stronger, even more of a beast to what he already is. And then, we'll be able to get that early stoppage, create a bit of a statement, create more of a name for himself. But I just don't necessarily know where he does go from there. Like I say, if he's not going to be able to fight for a light heavyweight title anytime soon. Canelo doesn't really necessarily seem to want to fight him at the moment, so I'm not too sure where he could go. We'll have to wait and see what ventures he goes on, but at the moment he is still one of the most entertaining fighters around, and is one of my favourite fighters around at the moment, offensive wise. And yeah, like I say, another impressive victory is what I am expecting from him. Moving on back now to the main event, Davis versus Martin. Davis, as a fighter, I'm going to list things about him. I'm probably going to miss certain things, but everybody knows what Davis is about realistically and knows the talent that he does possess. But to speak about it, of course, the countering ability, the timing, the accuracy, the power, it's just it's just amazing. He does fight so differently to the majority of fighters, and it's just such an impressive style. And yet again, in his last fight, he proved that that style is something which is just too much for a lot of opponents, and he baits you in so much. And when you're against fighters which come in with confidence like you want them to, he's just then going to bait you in and just break that confidence instantly, which is just so crazy to be able to do. It's like you should go into there hesitant, but you don't want to be hesitant either. It's very difficult to be able to mentally prepare yourself to fight somebody like Davis. And like I say, he baits you in, he's patient, he's very good at handling pressure as well. Even if you do come onto the front foot and he can't land a shot in which he wants to, he's very good at dealing with pressure. He has that high IQ, he finds the angles, finds the openings, waits, just perfect pinpoint timing. He controls the distance, finds his distance. He's so explosive to be able to just quickly get into range just like that. He also goes to the body very well as well and sets up the openings, perhaps if there isn't any, by going to the body. But he also doesn't have to throw a lot to be able to create gaps. He just finds the gaps, which is just so impressive as well. He has got a very good chin. I think that's something which is underrated. I believe he can take a shot. I think sometimes he has had to take a shot just from the style that he does fight. Obviously, being on the back foot and in fighting pressure, he does have to take a shot, and he can do that. And I believe he can ride shots and be able to come back. He's punishing. He's got a great game plan as well. He finds every intricate detail. His team finds every intricate detail. Same with the Garcia fight. You could see what he was going to do. Well, he could see what he was going to do before it even happened. He could see the shots in which he was going to throw, and you can just credit that down to not only his IQ, but also the team's IQ as well, and the game plan that they had to be able to, see when the little details of what's going to signify Garcia to throw a particular shot. And yeah, it's just so impressive. His balance, the fact he improves throughout fights. Then 5th, 6th, 7th rounds, they're normally his rounds. They're normally where he's thriving the most. But obviously he's a little bit of a slow starter, but when he gets into them rounds, the middle rounds especially, they're his rounds. He's very well disciplined, in the ring perhaps a little bit more so than outside of the ring. He moves very well, his reactions are at pinpoint, and in general, yeah, he's just such a complete fighter to an extent. Obviously there are negatives which I'm going to list in a moment, but just in general, an amazing world-class fighter. And I don't necessarily think a win like this is going to shoot him up pound for pound rankings wise, but it's still another win, another name to add to the resume. And I'm sure after this we will probably end up seeing, of course if he wins after this, we'll probably end up seeing another huge fight for him. Negatives I suppose wise, he obviously, like I say, the outside world kind of problems, don't necessarily know where mentally his head is at, if it is as focused, as locked in, as dialed in as perhaps it should be and perhaps it normally is. He does, of course, like I say, invite pressure. He can give away rounds just from activity, and perhaps Martin could find success from just keeping a very boxing, simple, boring to an extent style. If he could do that, just sticking behind the jab, really not committing to much, just poking out a jab. That's all he does. Then he could win, but like I say, it's boring, and when you have that confidence and you want to come in and prove a point, it's very difficult to just do that for a whole fight. He may be overlooking, like I mentioned, he's a slow starter, like I mentioned, he has that limited shot output, he perhaps could be slower than that of Martin may be a bit slower, but I don't necessarily know. He doesn't always, use his jab too much. He can be moved around physically as the smaller fighter. He, like say, if the opponent says disciplined, and he can stand straight on a little bit at times as well. And so there are little bits of things. Like I say, there is a way in which Martin can win. There's definitely no doubt about that. But it would have to be a very intricate performance. Either I believe he can just stay behind a jab the entire time, or he perhaps ties up and just doesn't let Martin go. But that's also very risky, because then you are getting in close onto Davis. I mean, not Martin. If you are getting very close onto Davis. Speak about Martin as a fighter though, he's explosive in his own right. He has that athleticism. He can go all the rounds very nicely and is very well conditioned as well, so he'll be more than prepared to go into the later rounds if it needs to be. He's fast, he moves well, he aims to beat you to the punch, which I don't necessarily know if it's the best of things to have attribute wise. Normally that is a good thing, but like I say, against Davis, I don't necessarily know if that's the best of things or not. He's got solid timing, so perhaps by some chance he could catch Davis when Davis comes in with his solid timing. Martin, he counters well as well, and of course he wants to prove he works angles, he uses his jab, he has got a nice jab, and he fights probably best in my opinion at a mid-range, but he can also fight in close as well. He sits down on his shots well. That's something which I like to see, like I say, sitting down on them punches. Digs to the body nicely, resets well as well, so if he does perhaps get caught, maybe even dropped against Martin, against Davis, I could see him resetting and getting back to what was working to him and getting back to his boxing, and perhaps that could be something which could benefit him. I mean, if he gets caught with a shot, then resets, then just becomes a little bit more hesitant and reluctant to throw and just, like I say, sticks behind the jab, that could work well for him. He does normally let his hands go, and he can be quite a pressure fighter when he wants to be. Negatives about him, I suppose, this is a step up in opponent, and that's no doubt. He has fought top level opponents, but this is a clear step up. He doesn't always make necessarily adjustments. I think the Harutinian body shots were really just consistently getting to him, pretty much just the same body shot over and over again, and he just didn't really seem to adjust to be able to get away from that. And I'm sure Davis has seen that, and with the body shots in which Davis has in his arsenal, with the power that he possesses with them, that could definitely lead to Davis seeing that and wanting to prove and wanting to do that. He has a bit of a weak guard, he can be hit, I think he can struggle against high levels of pressure, but I don't think Davis is going to really put that on. He has that lesser power. I think his chin's going to be in the air, so that's a target in which Davis can land on. He will be backed up and can be backed up, but also can force the fight if he thinks he has you hurt, and that could lead right into Davis's plan if he, looks perhaps a little bit hurt, or if he goes onto the back foot and invites that pressure. Martin could just see that as a green flag to just sprint forwards, but Davis could definitely just walk him onto a shot doing that. He, like I say, he's been hurt to the body, and he doesn't really cut off the ring the best either. And for somebody who moves as well as Davis, if you're not really cutting off the ring either, then he would just be continuing to just move around the ring at his own will. Davis is the favourite for this fight, and I think that Davis is going to win via TKO in round 8. I think Martin perhaps could survive into past the middle rounds and into them later rounds, and like I say, could have success if he just sticks to the boxing. Perhaps early on could definitely maybe even hurt or stumble Davis at some point, but Martin, I think, like I say, he just will get that confidence, which I don't blame him at all for having, but just like I say, that want to prove, that confidence. And like I say, I've seen him try and force fights a little bit at times, and I've seen him hurt to the body as well. He can either be slowed down to the body from Davis, or he could be walked onto a shot from Davis. And so I think there are more ways in which Davis can win, and win via stoppage, and that's what I think, like I say, he will do. Then we could go on to fight. I mean, Stevenson is probably the fight in which everybody wants to see the most. Of course, he's fighting Harutinian, like I've mentioned. Obviously, he has to get through that, but that's a huge fight, and that would make sense. Otherwise, Lomachenko, he's coming off that win versus Kambosos Jr., which is a great victory for him, and to get him another world title, another world title fight, to become to have another belt to his name, that would be huge as well. And so they're probably the two biggest fights. Or Zepeda, he's mandatory challenger for that WBA title, in which Davis has. I don't necessarily know if that would be next, but you never know. Like I say, as that mandatory challenger, you do never know. But with Golden Boy, you also don't know necessarily if they will be willing to work with PBC and to work to make a fight with Davis. But yeah, that was it for today's video. I hope you did enjoy. Like the video if you did indeed like the video, subscribe if you're new, and thanks for watching.